Welcome to Story Harbor, where every story finds a home. Emotional, cinematic tales of love, sacrifice, and second chances. Subscribe for stories that touch a heart.
She spent 25 years making people laugh. And then, at 57 years old, Leanne Morgan became the most watched female comedian in Netflix history. Nobody saw it coming, especially not Hollywood. So when Joy Behar looked at this sweet-faced grandmother from Tennessee and said, on live television, with that signature smirk, "But is what you do really comedy? Or is it just comfort food for people who can't handle real humor?" Everyone expected Leanne to laugh it off, to be nice, the way she always was. They didn't expect her voice to drop. "Honey, bless your heart. Let me tell you something about real humor." What followed would become the most watched view clip of the year. Not because Leanne Morgan yelled, because of what she said about Joy's career, about coastal elitism, about who gets to decide what counts as real art, because she did it all while smiling. And then she stood up, thanked everyone for having her, and walked off the stage like she was leaving a church potluck that had run a little long. Subscribe right now, because you're about to watch a sweet grandmother from Knoxville teach Joy Behar a lesson she'll never forget. The View studio had a different energy that morning. Leanne Morgan wasn't the typical View guest. She didn't have a publicist army or a dramatic backstory or a controversial hot take to promote. She was just a 58-year-old comedian from Tennessee who had somehow, against all odds, become one of the biggest names in comedy. She walked onto the set exactly the way her fans would expect, warm, slightly flustered by the attention. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her smile was genuine, and she waved at the audience like she was greeting neighbors at a backyard barbecue. "Leanne Morgan, everyone," Whoopi announced, and the applause was thunderous, filled with the particular enthusiasm that came from an audience packed with her devoted fans. "Oh my goodness," Leanne said, settling into the guest chair and pressing a hand to her chest. "Y'all are gonna make me cry, and I just got my makeup done. Lord have mercy." The audience laughed. They always laughed. That was Leanne's gift. She could make people laugh just by breathing. The first 12 minutes were everything a promotional interview should be. They talked about her Netflix sitcom, Leanne, now in its second season with Chuck Lorre. They talked about the Gracie Award she'd just won. They talked about her sold-out Time of Our Lives tour, about working with Will Ferrell and Reese Witherspoon, about balancing fame with being a grandmother in Knoxville. Joy Behar sat quietly through all of it, smiling, nodding. But there was something in her eyes that the other hosts recognized, that familiar sharpness, waiting for its moment. It was Sarah who innocently opened the door. "Leanne, what I love about your comedy is that it's so accessible. The whole family can watch together. That's so rare these days." Leanne nodded warmly. "Well, that's always been important to me. I want my mama to be able to watch my shows. I want my kids to bring their kids. Comedy doesn't have to be dirty to be funny, you know? Some of the funniest moments in life happen at the dinner table, or in the carpool line, or at 3 in the morning when your husband's snoring like a freight train and you're considering smothering him with a pillow." The audience roared with laughter. Several women were nodding vigorously, clearly relating. "That's the stuff that connects people," Leanne continued. "The real, everyday stuff. The stuff we all go through. That's what I want to talk about." That's when Joy leaned forward. "Speaking of what you talk about, Leanne." The shift in her tone was subtle but unmistakable. The warmth she'd been displaying evaporated, replaced by something sharper. "Your comedy is very safe, very comfortable. Some people might even call it predictable." She paused, letting the words settle. "Don't you ever worry that you're giving audiences exactly what they expect instead of challenging them?" The studio went quiet. The easy laughter from moments before dissolved into uncomfortable silence. Leanne's smile stayed in place, but something shifted behind her eyes. "I'm sorry. What do you mean by safe?" Joy straightened in her chair, clearly pleased to have landed a blow. "I mean, real comedy pushes boundaries. It makes people uncomfortable. It challenges assumptions and takes risks. But your act is, well, it's nice. It's pleasant. It's the comedy equivalent of a Hallmark movie. She said Hallmark movie the way someone might say gas station sushi. Some critics would argue that what you do isn't really comedy at all. It's more like comfort food for people who can't handle anything with real nutritional value. The audience stirred uneasily. Whoopi's eyebrows rose. Sarah looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. Leanne was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was still warm, still honey thick with that Tennessee accent. But there was something underneath it now. Something harder. Comfort food, she repeated slowly. That's an interesting way to put it. I'm just asking the questions that some people in the comedy world are asking, Joy continued, apparently emboldened by Leanne's calm response. In an era when comedy is supposed to be dangerous, when it's supposed to challenge power and push against the status quo, isn't there something a little regressive about doing an hour of jokes about your husband's snoring and your mother-in-law's casseroles? The accusation hung in the air like something toxic. Leanne's smile didn't waver, but her eyes went cold in a way that viewers had never seen before. When she spoke, her voice carried a sweetness that somehow made every word land harder. Well, Joy, bless your heart. I appreciate you sharing your opinion about what comedy is supposed to be. She tilted her head slightly, studying Joy the way a mother might study a child who just said something particularly foolish. But I've got a few thoughts of my own, if you don't mind. Please, Joy said, that smug smile still in place. Enlighten us. Leanne stood up slowly, and the movement commanded every eye in the studio. She smoothed her blouse with practiced hands, the hands of a woman who'd spent 25 years commanding rooms full of strangers. You want to talk about real comedy? Let's talk about it. Her voice was still sweet, but it had developed an edge that cut through the studio like a knife through warm butter. You've been on television for how long now, Joy? 40 years? And in all that time, how many comedy specials have you done? How many sold-out tours? How many hours have you spent alone on a stage with nothing but a microphone and your own words? Joy's smile faltered. That's not really because I've done 25 years of that. Leanne's voice rose slightly but never lost its warmth, which somehow made it more devastating. 25 years of driving myself to shows in a minivan. 25 years of performing in comedy clubs that smelled like beer and regret. 25 years of being told I was too southern, too clean, too nice to make it in this business. She walked toward the panel desk, her heels clicking against the floor with deliberate precision. And then, at an age when most people in Hollywood are being put out to pasture, I became the most watched female comedian in Netflix history. Not because I was edgy, not because I was dangerous, not because I challenged people's assumptions or made them uncomfortable. She stopped directly in front of Joy, because I made them feel seen, because I told the truth about their lives in a way that made them laugh instead of cry, because I reminded them that the absurd, exhausting, beautiful chaos of everyday life, the kids, the husband, the aging parents, the body that's falling apart, all of it, is worthy of being talked about, is worthy of being laughed about. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Leanne wasn't finished. You call that safe? You call that comfort food? Her voice dropped lower, more intense. Let me tell you something about comfort, Joy. The women who come to my shows, and they are mostly women, by the way, the same women your industry ignores unless they're young and pretty and willing to be the butt of someone else's jokes, those women are exhausted. She paused, letting her words settle over the studio like a warm blanket. They're working full-time jobs and raising kids and taking care of aging parents and trying to hold their marriages together and dealing with bodies that don't work the way they used to. They're carrying more weight than anyone gives them credit for. And when they come to my shows, they get to put that weight down for 2 hours. They get to laugh. They get to feel like someone sees them, someone gets it, someone thinks their life is worth talking about. Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. That's what I do, Joy. I see people. I make them feel less alone. I remind them that the stuff they're going through, the stuff that nobody in Hollywood thinks is important enough to make movies about, is actually the most universal human experience there is. She gestured around the studio. You want to know what real comedy is? Real comedy is connecting with people. Real comedy is making someone laugh so hard they forget their problems for a minute. Real comedy is creating a room full of strangers who suddenly feel like family because they're all laughing at the same truth. She turned back to Joy and her smile returned, but it was different now. Sharper. More dangerous. You can sit there in your fancy New York studio and tell me that what I do isn't real comedy, but I've got 100,000 people a year buying tickets to my shows. I've got Netflix calling me back for more specials. I've got Chuck Lorre, who's been making hit sitcoms since before you were on this show, creating a series around my life. She leaned closer to Joy, and her voice dropped to almost a whisper. So maybe, just maybe, the problem isn't that my comedy isn't real enough. Maybe the problem is that people like you have spent so long deciding what counts as important that you've forgotten what actually matters to actual people. Joy's face had gone red. Her hands were trembling slightly on the desk. The confident attacker from moments ago looked suddenly small, diminished, like someone who had just realized they'd picked a fight they couldn't win. I wasn't trying to insult you, she started. Yes, you were. Leanne's voice was still sweet, still warm, but it carried devastating weight. You were trying to put me in my place. You were trying to remind me that even though I've sold out arenas and broken Netflix records and won awards, I'm still just a little Southern lady who does nice comedy. Not real comedy, not important comedy, just comfort food. She let out a small laugh that somehow made everything worse. You know what's funny, Joy? And I mean actually funny, not the kind of edgy funny you seem to prefer. I've spent my whole career being underestimated by people like you. People who think that because I'm from Tennessee, because I talk about my family, because I don't curse or shock people, I must not be a real comedian. She straightened up, looking around the studio at the audience, at the other hosts, at the cameras still rolling. But here's what I've learned in 25 years of doing this. The people who dismiss nice comedy are usually the ones who can't make anyone laugh. It's easy to be mean. It's easy to shock people. It's easy to make someone uncomfortable and call it pushing boundaries. Any fool can say something offensive and call it edgy. Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. But making people genuinely happy? Making them feel better about their lives instead of worse? Making them laugh at themselves and each other with love instead of cruelty? That takes skill. That takes craft. That takes actually caring about the people in front of you instead of just caring about your own reputation. She turned back to Joy one final time. You want to know the difference between us, Joy? I spend my life trying to make people feel better. You spend yours trying to make them feel worse. And at the end of the day, you have to live with that. I don't. Joy stood up abruptly, her chair rolling backward. This is ridiculous. No, honey, this is the truth. Leanne's voice stopped her mid-sentence. And I know the truth is uncomfortable for you. That's why you spend so much time avoiding it. She walked back to her chair and picked up her purse, a sensible handbag that probably cost $40 at Target. The movement was so casual, so unhurried, that it took everyone a moment to realize what was happening. I want to thank y'all for having me on the show, she said, addressing Whoopi and the other hosts with genuine warmth. I've enjoyed meeting most of you. The emphasis on most was subtle but unmistakable. She turned to face the audience, and her smile returned in full force, the warm, genuine smile that had made millions of people fall in love with her. To everyone watching who's ever been told their taste isn't sophisticated enough, their humor isn't edgy enough, their lives aren't interesting enough, don't you believe it? You are enough. Your story matters. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to laugh at things that don't make you feel bad about yourself. She looked at Joy one last time. You might want to try it sometime, Joy. Laughing without hurting anyone. It's actually quite nice. And then Leanne Morgan, the sweet grandmother from Tennessee, the queen of clean comedy, the woman who'd spent 25 years being underestimated, walked off the stage with her head held high and her smile firmly in place. The studio was frozen. Joy Behar stood alone near the panel desk, her face a mixture of fury and something that might have been shame. The audience sat in stunned silence, none of them quite sure how to process what they'd just witnessed. A sweet grandmother from Tennessee had just dismantled one of daytime television's most formidable personalities, and she'd done it without ever raising her voice or losing her smile. 30 seconds passed before anyone spoke. It felt like an hour. The silence was so complete you could hear the hum of the studio lights overhead, the soft whir of the cameras still recording. Whoopi was the first to find her voice, but it was shaky, uncertain. "Well, I think we need to go to commercial." Sarah was staring at the door where Leanne had disappeared, her expression a mix of shock and something that looked almost like admiration. "Did that just happen?" Sunny was shaking her head slowly. "I've never seen anyone do that. Not like that. Not with a smile on their face the whole time. It was like watching a master class." The audience began to murmur, then to buzz, then to erupt in a kind of delayed applause, the recognition that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Someone had finally said what so many people had been thinking, and she'd done it with grace, with humor, and with absolute devastating precision. Several women in the front row were wiping tears from their eyes. Joy stood alone at the desk, her microphone still on, her face still red. She looked smaller somehow than she had at the beginning of the interview, diminished. The predator had become the prey, and everyone in that studio knew it. The clip went viral before the show even ended. Leanne Morgan destroys Joy Behar wasn't just a trending topic, it became a movement. Women across America shared the clip with captions like, "Finally someone said it," and "This is why we love her." The video racked up 50 million views in 24 hours. What resonated wasn't just the confrontation, it was the defense of ordinary life. The reminder that comedy doesn't have to be cruel to be meaningful. The validation of everyone who'd ever been told their taste wasn't sophisticated enough, their concerns weren't important enough, their laughter wasn't worthy enough. Comedians rallied to her defense. Nate Bargatze posted, "Leanne Morgan is the real deal. Making people happy is the hardest thing in comedy, and she does it better than anyone." Jeff Foxworthy wrote, 25 years of work, millions of people's lives made better. That's what matters. Everything else is just noise. Even critics who dismissed her work found themselves reconsidering. One wrote, "Maybe we've been asking the wrong questions about comedy. Maybe the question isn't whether something is edgy enough. Maybe it's whether it actually makes people's lives better." Joy Behar returned to The View 2 days later. She offered no apology, but those who knew her noticed something different. A hesitation before dismissing things as unsophisticated. A pause before using words like real or important. And Leanne Morgan? She went back to Knoxville. Back to her husband and her kids and her grandbabies and her beagle. Back to selling out arenas full of people who just wanted to laugh. Back to doing what she'd always done, making the world a little bit happier, one joke at a time. Because that's what Leanne Morgan does. She makes people feel seen, and no amount of coastal criticism can ever take that away. What did you think of this confrontation? Was Joy out of line, or was she asking fair questions? Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories that will absolutely blow your mind.